Here's a shorter, more natural version that keeps every important event and emotion without changing the story. When I was 17, I came home to an empty house and a note on the kitchen counter that simply said, "You'll figure it out." My parents and younger brother had packed everything, moved 2 states away, and left without telling me. A week later, my landlord informed me they had ended the lease early, giving me just 7 days to move out. Looking back, I realized this wasn't the first time they had treated me like I didn't matter. At 13, I baked my mom a birthday cake by myself, and she called it clumpy. At 15, I spent hours helping my brother study for his finals, only for him to call me a know-it-all and slam the door in my face. At 16, I handed my entire paycheck to my dad so he could pay the bills, yet he later called me useless when I reminded him of it. I was always useful, but never loved. With nowhere to go, I stayed at a friend's house for a few days before sleeping in the back of a storage unit I rented with my last savings. I showered at the YMCA, lived on peanut butter, searched for jobs on library computers, and pretended everything was okay. Eventually, I got a night shift job at a diner. The manager was strict but kind, paying me cash until I could replace my ID and even letting me sleep in the break room when exhaustion caught up with me. I saved every dollar, watched free YouTube videos about finance and goal setting, and slowly started rebuilding my life. A regular customer later offered me a temporary office job that paid 3 times more than waiting tables. I worked hard, learned quickly, and every opportunity led to another. By 22, I was freelancing full-time. At 25, I started my own consulting business with nothing more than a borrowed laptop and a folding table. By 27, I had an office, 5 contractors, and clients I'd once only dreamed of working with. At 29, I became a real millionaire with savings, no debt, a paid-off apartment, and health insurance I could finally afford. Seeing my bank account reach 7 figures made me cry. During all those years, my family never contacted me once. I occasionally saw my brother online and wondered if he ever told anyone I existed. I didn't hate them. I was simply heartbroken. Therapy helped me heal. I made a list of everyone who had shown me kindness along the way, from coworkers to strangers, because they became the support my own family never gave me. Then last week, everything changed. A podcast interview I gave about surviving family estrangement went viral, reaching over 1 million views in just 4 days. My inbox filled with supportive messages, but one email stopped me cold. The subject line read, "You're still our daughter." ***, it was from my mom. There was no apology, just a message saying she'd heard my story and maybe we could talk. Soon after, my brother sent another message. "We miss you. Can we fix this?" ***, I stared at the screen for a long time before closing my laptop. I didn't know if healing meant looking back or continuing to move forward. Instead of answering immediately, I decided to take my therapist Melissa's advice and give myself at least a week before making any decision. Give yourself time to feel whatever comes up, my therapist Melissa told me. There's no rush to respond. So I waited. I buried myself in work, went to the gym, had dinner with friends, and tried to live normally. But those emails stayed on my mind. I kept opening them, reading them, and closing them again. My mom's message felt distant and emotionless, almost like she was writing to a stranger. My brother's email was much shorter, but somehow it felt more sincere. After 10 days, I finally replied to my brother. I kept it simple. It's been 12 years. What changed? He answered within an hour. He said my podcast made him realize what our family had done. He reminded me he was only 15 when our parents left me behind, said he had no choice, had often wondered about me, searched for me online over the years, and was proud of everything I'd accomplished. I wasn't convinced. If he'd really cared, why wait until I became successful? When I asked him that, he admitted the truth. My parents' business had failed, money was tight, his wife was pregnant with their second child, and medical bills were piling up. The moment I read that, my stomach sank. There was the real reason they had reached out. A week later, my mom emailed again. She attached old family photos of me as a baby, beach trips when I was 5 or 6, and pictures of Michael and me building a snowman. Looking at them felt like I was staring at someone else's childhood. At the end of the email, she wrote, "We made mistakes. We want to make amends." Asterisk asterisk, during my next therapy session, I showed everything to Melissa. She reminded me that I was in control, that I could set boundaries, and that I didn't owe my family anything. But she also said closure might help me move on, whether that meant rebuilding the relationship or saying goodbye forever. I felt torn. Part of me wanted to tell them to go to hell. Another part wanted answers. And deep down, there was still a small part of me that wanted my family to love me. Eventually, I agreed to meet my brother, but only him. We chose a coffee shop in Chicago, halfway between where we lived. I flew in that morning, checked into a hotel, and nearly canceled 3 different times before finally walking inside at 2 p.m. I recognized Michael immediately. He looked older, heavier, and his hair was starting to recede, but his eyes hadn't changed. He stood up awkwardly when he saw me. We didn't hug. We simply sat across from each other with our coffee like 2 strangers. The first 20 minutes were painfully awkward as we talked about the weather, my flight, and his drive. Then he finally apologized. "Emma, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I was just a kid. I didn't know they were leaving you behind until it was too late. I was too scared to stand up to them." Asterisk asterisk, I listened carefully, searching his face for any sign that he was lying. He seemed genuine, but I trusted people before and been hurt. Then I asked the question I carried with me for 12 years. "Why me?" Asterisk asterisk, he looked down at his coffee before answering. He said our parents always believed I was the strong, independent one, the child who would be okay on her own. They convinced themselves I didn't need them as much as he did, and somehow believed I'd be better off without them. It was the most unbelievable thing I'd ever heard. I told him the truth about those years, sleeping in a storage unit, surviving on peanut butter, showering at the YMCA, and working night shifts at 17 just to stay alive. His face fell. "I didn't know," he whispered. "They told me you wanted to stay behind, that you already had a place to live with a friend's family, and that leaving was your choice." Asterisk asterisk, every word had been a lie. By the end of our meeting, I still didn't know what to believe. Michael seemed genuinely sorry. He showed me photos of his wife and daughter, talked about his job as an accountant, asked about my business, and, to my surprise, never asked me for money. When it was time to leave, he hugged me. I let him, but I couldn't bring myself to hug him back. I just stood there with my arms at my sides, feeling completely numb. Back at my hotel, I called my therapist, Melissa, and told her everything. She pointed out that while Michael sounded remorseful, he was still presenting himself as a victim instead of accepting his role in abandoning me. She was right. He'd been 15, not 5, old enough to pick up a phone, send an email, or check on me at least once during those 12 years. That night, my mom called. I never gave her my number, so Michael must have. I almost ignored the call, but curiosity got the better of me. She sounded older, her voice shaky with tears. She told me how proud she was, how she'd always believed I would succeed, and how special I was. I let her finish before asking the same question I'd asked Michael. "Why me?" Asterisk asterisk, her answer was even worse. She said they were drowning in debt and couldn't afford to feed 3 people. They believed I was smart enough to survive on my own. They assumed I would contact social services, be placed with a better family, and have a better life. In her mind, they thought they were doing me a favor. I hung up immediately, blocked her number, threw my phone across the room, and screamed into a pillow. The next morning, I received my first message from my dad in 12 years. There was no apology. Instead, he wrote about their failed business, medical bills, Michael's wife needing surgery, and the possibility of losing their home. At the very end, he asked if I could help the family financially. Not once did he ask how I'd been. Not once did he acknowledge what they'd done to me. I forwarded the email to Melissa with the subject line, and there it is. Asterisk asterisk, even though it was Sunday, she called me right away. We spent an hour talking about boundaries, the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, and how helping someone isn't always the same as enabling them. Most importantly, she reminded me to focus on what I wanted, not what I felt guilty for wanting. By Monday, I had made my decision. I emailed Michael and told him I was glad we'd met. I understood he had been in a difficult position as a teenager, and I was willing to build a relationship with him and his family. but only with clear boundaries. No money, no loans, no financial support, and no relationship with our parents unless they fully accepted responsibility for abandoning me. His reply came almost immediately. He said he was disappointed that our parents desperately needed help, that family should support one another, and that I was being selfish with my success. Reading those words triggered every guilt button they'd installed in me as a child. I didn't answer. Instead, I scheduled another appointment with Melissa and booked a vacation to Bali. I needed time away from all of it. 3 days later, Michael left me a voicemail apologizing for his email. He said he understood my boundaries, wanted a relationship on my terms, and would respect my decision. I listened to it twice, unsure whether he truly meant it or was simply changing his approach. I decided to give him one more chance, but I kept my guard up. Then I went to Bali. For 2 weeks, I relaxed on the beach, hiked through rice fields, and spent time meditating. The distance gave me room to think. When I returned home, 6 more emails from my dad were waiting for me. Each sounded more desperate than the last. I never read beyond the subject lines. Michael also texted, asking if we could talk again. I agreed to a phone call, nothing more. At first, the conversation went well. He apologized again for pushing me and said he'd started therapy too. This time, I believed him. He sounded calmer and less defensive. We talked about his children, my business, and other normal things. Then he mentioned that our parents would be visiting him the following weekend and asked if I'd consider meeting them for just 1 hour in a public place. My chest tightened. I'm not ready for that, Michael. He tried to convince me, but when I went quiet, he backed off. After we hung up, I called Melissa, and we had an emergency therapy session that same evening. She helped me realize something I hadn't admitted to myself. I wasn't afraid of seeing my parents because I hated them. I was afraid because, deep down, I still wanted their approval. A part of me still wanted them to love me. Deep down, I still wanted to be enough. It felt pathetic, but it was the truth. I broke down in Melissa's office and cried for nearly an hour. The next day, Michael texted me again. He said our mom had cried all night after learning I wouldn't meet them and that our dad was talking about driving to my city anyway. Panic hit me. I blocked Michael's number immediately, told my assistant I'd be working from home for the week, ordered groceries for delivery, and basically hid inside my apartment like the scared 17-year-old I'd once been. On Wednesday, my doorman called to say a couple was downstairs asking for me, but refused to give their names. I knew exactly who it was. I told him I wasn't accepting visitors. 5 minutes later, an unknown number called. I let it go to voicemail. It was my dad. "Emma, we drove 8 hours to see you," he said angrily. "You're being childish. We deserve a chance to explain." Asterisk, asterisk, I deleted the message and turned off my phone. The next morning, loud pounding on my apartment door woke me up. My heart started racing. I looked through the peephole. It was my parents. They stood outside my door as if they still had a place in my life. "Emma, please," my mom pleaded. "We just want to talk." Asterisk, asterisk, then my dad added, "We know you're in there. We love you. We're sorry." Asterisk, asterisk, I didn't answer. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, shaking until they finally gave up and left. As soon as they were gone, I called building security and asked them never to let those people into the building again. The guard sounded concerned and even asked if I wanted the police involved. I told him no, I just wanted them kept away from me. Then I called Melissa. She came over during her lunch break, brought me a sandwich, and stayed with me while I cried. She reminded me that I had every right to protect my peace, that I didn't owe my parents a meeting, and that what they were doing wasn't reconciliation. It was harassment. After she left, another email from Michael arrived. This time he was angry. He said I'd humiliated our parents, that they were staying in a cheap motel they couldn't afford because they were desperate to see me, that his wife needed surgery the following month, and that they had hoped I would help. Then he accused me of being cruel. I never replied. By Friday morning, I knew I needed to leave town. I booked a flight to Portland to visit my friend Rachel, the same friend who had let me sleep on her couch when I was homeless years earlier. I trusted her completely. While packing my suitcase, another unknown number called. I ignored it. 10 minutes later, my doorman called again. He said a woman downstairs appeared to be having a medical emergency. She kept asking for me by name and claimed to be my mother. My stomach dropped. I told him that if she needed medical attention, he should call an ambulance, but I wasn't coming downstairs. He agreed. About an hour later, I finished packing and carefully checked the lobby before leaving. My parents were gone. The doorman told me an ambulance had taken the woman to Memorial Hospital after she complained of chest pains. I thanked him, climbed into my Uber, and headed for the airport. While waiting for my flight, Michael called again. This time I answered. He was crying. "Mom had a heart attack," he said. "She's in surgery. This is your fault for stressing her out." Asterisk, asterisk, I hung up immediately and called Melissa instead. When I asked if I was a terrible person, she answered without hesitation. "Emma, listen to me. You are not responsible for your mother's health. This feels like another attempt to manipulate you. Get on that plane and take care of yourself." Asterisk, asterisk, so I did. I spent the weekend with Rachel and told her everything. She remembered what it was like when my family abandoned me and how broken I had been afterward. She was furious. "They don't deserve a single minute of your time," she said as she poured me another glass of wine. "Not after everything they did to you." Asterisk, asterisk, for the first time in a while, it felt good to have someone completely on my side. On Sunday night, my dad emailed again. He said my mom had survived, received a stent, and would be released from the hospital on Tuesday. Then he ended the email with one final line. "She's asking for you. Don't you think you've punished us enough?" Asterisk, asterisk, I showed the email to Rachel. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. She called it textbook guilt tripping. I knew she was right. Even so, a part of me still couldn't stop feeling responsible. I flew home on Monday and found a bouquet of flowers outside my apartment door. The card simply read, "Please call us. We're staying at the Holiday Inn until Wednesday." Asterisk, asterisk, there was no apology. No respect for the boundaries I'd already made clear. Just another demand. I threw the flowers down the trash chute. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of my mom lying in a hospital bed, looking pale and fragile. The message said, "She may not have much time left. Do you really want to live with this regret?" Asterisk, asterisk, I blocked the number and immediately called Melissa. She suggested I take a break from social media, change my phone number, and even stay somewhere else for a while. I agreed. I told my assistant I'd be working remotely for the next 2 weeks and started packing another bag. Before I could leave, my doorman called again. This time, he said a young woman was downstairs with a small child. She claimed to be my sister-in-law. I felt trapped. They just wouldn't stop. Instead of hiding, I told them to send her up. When she knocked, she looked completely exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes, and she carried a sleeping toddler on her shoulder. "I'm Jenny," she said quietly. "Michael's wife. I came alone because I want to talk without all the family drama." I hesitated, then invited her inside and offered her some water. She gratefully accepted, gently laid her sleeping daughter on my couch, tucked a blanket around her, and sat down at my kitchen table. Then she told me everything. She admitted she'd only learned about me 3 years earlier. Michael had always told her I ran away at 17 and cut off contact with the family. She thought the story sounded strange, but never questioned it. Everything changed after hearing my podcast. She confronted Michael, and he finally admitted the truth. "I'm horrified by what they did to you," she said. "I encouraged Michael to contact you, but I had no idea they were asking you for money. I'm ashamed of that." She also cleared up something else. Yes, she needed surgery for a thyroid condition, but they had insurance. The financial problems belonged to my parents, not her and Michael. As she looked me in the eyes, "You deserve to know the whole truth." Asterisk, asterisk, she told me my parents had spent years telling everyone that I abandoned the family, that I was mentally unstable, that I stole money before disappearing, and that they searched for me for years. Every bit of it was a lie. I felt like all the air had left my lungs. When I asked how she knew, she opened Facebook on her phone and showed me years of posts. There were messages from my mom asking people to pray for her troubled daughter. Posts from my dad claiming I'd stolen their savings before running away. Stories about hiring private investigators and searching homeless shelters. Every post painted them as loving parents and me as the problem. The dates made it even worse. They'd written those lies years after they had abandoned me. Jenny apologized for unknowingly believing them. She said she confronted my parents herself, and when she threatened to expose them to the rest of the family, They admitted everything. According to her, they were desperate because my podcast had gone viral and people were beginning to question their version of events. Just then, her daughter woke up. She was a sweet little girl with curly hair. "This is Lily," Jenny said with a smile. "She's 3 years old, and I'm pregnant with another daughter." She paused before adding, "I like my girls to know their aunt, but only if that's something you want. No pressure. No guilt. The door is always open." After Jenny left, I sat alone for hours trying to process everything I'd learned. Later, I called Melissa and told her the entire conversation. She wasn't surprised. "People who abuse others often control the story," she explained. "They create a version of reality where they're always the victims." Then she asked me what I wanted to do next. Honestly, I had no idea. That night, another email arrived from my dad. This one wasn't emotional. It was threatening. He accused me of spreading lies online and said they would sue me for defamation. He claimed they had proof I'd stolen from them, threatened to go to the media with their version of events if I didn't remove the podcast and publicly apologize, and even demanded financial compensation for the damage to their reputation. I forwarded the email to Melissa and then to my lawyer, Marcus. He called almost immediately. "This is an empty threat," he assured me. "Truth is a complete defense against defamation. Save every message, but don't reply. If they actually file a lawsuit, which I seriously doubt, I'll handle it." People who genuinely plan to sue rarely announce it first. The following day, Michael called. I let it go to voicemail. He sounded panicked. Michael left a voicemail asking me to call him back on Jenny's phone instead of his. He sounded terrified. "Emma, Jenny told me she came to see you. Our parents are furious. They're saying horrible things about her now, and I'm scared they're going to do something desperate. Asterisk, asterisk, I didn't know what to believe anymore. So I called my lawyer, Marcus. He suggested meeting Michael and Jenny in a public place with him present, just to hear them out. I reluctantly agreed. The next day, we met at a restaurant near Marcus's office. They both looked exhausted. Jenny had a bruise on her arm that she kept trying to hide, and Michael could barely look me in the eye. Marcus introduced himself as my attorney, which clearly made Michael nervous, but once we sat down with coffee, they began telling me everything. The truth was even worse than I expected. For years, my parents had been living off Michael, moving in and out of his home, constantly asking for money, using babysitting as leverage while criticizing how he raised his children. When Jenny confronted them about what they'd done to me, my dad grabbed her arm so hard it left bruises. That was the moment Michael finally threw them out. Now, they were living in a motel, constantly calling him and even showing up at his workplace. As Michael spoke, he completely broke down. He admitted our parents had manipulated him his entire life. They convinced him I had abandoned the family, and he had been too afraid to question their version of events. For 12 years, he lived inside the lies they created. Now he was terrified they would go after Jenny or their children. Marcus carefully questioned them about finances. Were my parents tied to the house? Did they still have access to their money? Did they have keys? Michael admitted they had co-signed his mortgage. His dad was still connected to his bank account from college. They had spare keys to the house, and they even knew many of his passwords. Marcus quietly took notes the entire time. By the end of the meeting, I felt emotionally drained, but I also saw things differently. This wasn't only my story anymore. Michael and Jenny were victims too, not in the same way I was, but they had spent years trapped under the same manipulation and control. Marcus advised them to hire their own lawyer immediately. He also told them to change their locks, update every password, and remove my parents from any financial accounts. They agreed. As we were leaving, Michael hugged me. This time, I hugged him back. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first step toward acknowledging that we had both been hurt by the same people, and maybe together we could finally heal. That night, my parents flooded my phone with angry messages. They accused me of betraying them, made threats, and tried every guilt tactic they could think of. I blocked every number. Then I called Jenny to make sure she and the kids were safe. She told me they had already changed the locks and spent the previous night at a friend's house. They were also looking into getting a restraining order. For the first time in days, I felt a little relieved. The next morning, My phone rang. It was Jenny. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "They broke into our house," she cried. "They took Lily's baby pictures, important documents, Michael's laptop, and they left a note." The note read, "Family matters should stay in the family. Asterisk, asterisk." I immediately told her to call the police. Then I said I was on my way. I called Marcus as I drove. When I arrived, a police car was already parked outside. Inside, the house was a disaster. Drawers had been emptied onto the floor, papers were scattered everywhere, and furniture had been moved around. Michael sat on the couch with his head in his hands while Jenny walked an officer through everything that had been stolen. I introduced myself as family who had come to help. The officer seemed doubtful that grandparents would commit a break-in. "Are you sure they didn't just use a key?" he asked. "Maybe this is all a misunderstanding." Jenny quietly rolled up her sleeve and showed him the bruises on her arm. She explained the threats, the stalking, and everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The officer listened and took notes, but admitted it would be difficult to prove who was responsible without stronger evidence. After the police left, the four of us started cleaning up. As we searched the house, we realized even more was missing: family photo albums, financial paperwork, and the spare key to their car. Michael looked completely defeated. "This is all my fault," he whispered. "I should have protected my family. I should have stood up to them years ago, and I should have looked for you." I didn't argue with him, but I didn't add to his guilt either. There was no point anymore. A little later, Marcus arrived. He looked around the destroyed house, took a deep breath, and quietly said, "This changes everything." Asterisk, asterisk, Marcus told us we needed to document everything. Breaking into someone's home was a serious crime, and he wanted us all to stay somewhere safe for a few days. He also said he'd file emergency restraining orders first thing in the morning. None of us argued. We were too exhausted. While Jenny packed clothes for herself and Lily, Michael and I secured the house as best we could. We changed the locks again, checked every window, and talked about installing security cameras. It felt surreal taking these precautions against our own parents. But they had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. As we were leaving, Michael's phone buzzed. It was a text from our dad. "We're watching you." Asterisk, asterisk, his hands shook as he showed me the message. I immediately took a screenshot and sent it to Marcus. Then I made a decision. I told Michael, Jenny, and Lily they were coming home with me. My apartment building had security cameras, a doorman who already knew not to let our parents inside, and it was the safest place I could think of. They gratefully accepted. That night, the four of us sat in my living room eating takeout while Lily played with the toys Jenny had packed. We quietly discussed restraining orders, police reports, changing phone numbers and passwords, and whether they should eventually move to a new home. It wasn't the family reunion I'd ever imagined. I was sitting with the brother who hadn't saved me, the woman who had once believed lies about me, and their little girl who had done nothing wrong. Yet somehow it felt right. For the first time, we were all facing the truth together. Maybe, just maybe, we could build a new family from the ruins our parents had left behind. The next morning, Marcus called. He had already filed emergency restraining orders for all of us. We would need to appear in court the following week to make them permanent. He had also spoken to a detective who was taking the break-in much more seriously than the first responding officers had. Until everything was resolved, he recommended we stay together. I agreed. I called my assistant and explained that I would be working from home indefinitely because of a family emergency. She immediately rearranged my schedule. I turned my guest room into a workspace for Michael so he could work remotely. Jenny and Lily settled into the living room, building pillow forts and watching cartoons. At first, it felt strange having other people in my apartment. I'd lived alone for years. I was used to silence, spotless counters, and an empty sink. But after a while, the noise became comforting. Lily's laughter, Jenny softly humming while folding laundry, Michael typing away in the guest room. For the first time in a long while, my apartment actually felt like a home. Not the family that had abandoned me, but maybe the family we could become. That afternoon, my doorman called. Another flower delivery had arrived. I asked him to read the card before sending it upstairs. He paused before reading it aloud. "We know where you all are. This isn't over." Asterisk, asterisk, I told him not to accept the delivery and to call the police if the courier refused to take it back. Then I called Marcus again. He told me this only strengthened our case for restraining orders and reassured me that we were doing everything exactly right. I didn't tell Michael or Jenny about the flowers. They already had enough to carry. Instead, I ordered extra groceries, cooked dinner for everyone, played with Lily, and tried to create some sense of normal life in the middle of complete chaos. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen and finally let myself feel everything. The fear, the anger, the grief, and, strangely, hope. I cried quietly into a dish towel so no one would hear me. The next morning, Jenny found me making coffee. She asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was. She smiled gently, knowing I wasn't, and sat beside me at the counter. "It's okay not to be okay, Emma," she said softly. "I'm not okay either." Michael cries in the shower because he thinks no one can hear him. Lily keeps asking when we can go home. This is awful, but I'm grateful we're going through it together. Asterisk, asterisk, I looked at this woman I had barely known a few weeks earlier, yet who somehow had become part of my life. I asked why she had chosen to believe me instead of the family she'd known for years. She gave me a sad smile. "I've always felt something wasn't right about your parents," she admitted. The stories they told never added up, and the way they controlled Michael always bothered me. "Your podcast confirmed everything I'd been afraid of. I couldn't let my daughters grow up believing that abandoning a child was ever okay." Asterisk, asterisk, Jenny and I hugged for the first time. It felt a little awkward, but it was real. It wasn't friendship. Not yet, but it was understanding, support, and a shared determination to end the cycle of abuse that had hurt all of us. Over the next few days, we settled into a routine. We worked, cooked meals together, played with Lily, checked in with Marcus, and tried to live as normally as possible. But every unexpected sound made us jump. Every ringing phone made us tense. We were safe, but we weren't at peace. We were together, but still healing. We were becoming a family, while learning what that even meant. On Friday, Marcus called with good news. The detective had found evidence. Security footage from a gas station near Michael's house showed our parents' car in the area around the time of the break-in. Our restraining order hearing was scheduled for Monday, and Marcus felt confident we'd win. We were relieved, but we were still waiting for the next thing to happen. It came that very night. Someone smashed a brick through Michael's car window in my apartment's parking garage. There was no note. There didn't need to be. The message was obvious. Security cameras caught a man wearing a baseball cap with his face turned away. We couldn't prove it was our dad, but all of us believed it was. We filed another police report, added it to our growing case file, and did our best not to let Lily see how frightened we really were. On Sunday evening, we sat together preparing for court. We talked about what to wear, what to say, what evidence to bring, and how to explain years of manipulation without sounding unbelievable. Most of all, we wanted the judge to understand that this wasn't one isolated incident. It was a pattern that kept getting worse. It felt strange discussing our own parents like dangerous strangers. Yet that's exactly what they had become. While we were talking, my phone buzzed with another email from my mom. The subject line read, "Last chance." Asterisk, asterisk, I almost deleted it without opening it. Instead, I read it. It contained only one sentence. "If you go to court tomorrow, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Asterisk, asterisk, Marcus, who was still there for dinner, took a screenshot and added it to our evidence. He told me not to reply. "If anything," he said, "this only strengthens your case." That night, none of us slept much. I kept checking the locks, listening for every little sound, wondering what my parents might do next. I questioned everything. Were we overreacting? Or were we not taking this seriously enough? It was hard to believe my life had come to this. I had gone from abandoned teenager to a successful business owner to hiding inside my own apartment from the people who had brought me into this world. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected sense of calm. We all dressed carefully in business casual clothes, wanting to look respectful and credible. Jenny arranged for a friend to watch Lily. We drove to the courthouse in separate cars, just to be safe, and met Marcus on the courthouse steps. Briefcase in hand, he confidently reminded us that he'd handled many cases like this before. He believed our evidence was strong. He believed the judge would take the threats seriously. Most importantly, He believed we would be protected. As we walked toward the entrance, I saw them. My parents. They looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. My mom spotted me first and instinctively stepped toward me. My dad grabbed her arm and stopped her. They didn't speak. They simply watched us walk past with expressions that mixed anger. And something else. Maybe fear. We entered the courthouse, passed through security, followed Marcus into the courtroom, and sat together waiting for our case to be called. I could feel my parents sitting somewhere behind us. I could almost hear them whispering, but I never turned around. I kept my eyes forward and focused on breathing. Finally, the judge called our case. We stood and walked to the front of the courtroom. Marcus calmly presented every piece of evidence. The break-in, the threatening texts, the flowers, the brick through the car window, the threatening email, and the long history of abandonment, manipulation, and harassment. The judge listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and looked increasingly concerned. It was my parents' turn. They had no lawyer, just themselves. My dad spoke first. He claimed we were exaggerating everything, insisted they were only trying to reconnect with their family, denied breaking any laws, said they loved us, wanted to make things right, and argued that the whole situation had simply gotten out of hand. The judge asked about the security footage and the threatening messages. My dad denied all of it. He insisted it wasn't them in the video, claimed their texts had been misunderstood, and even argued that they, not us, were the real victims. Beside him, my mom quietly nodded, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as though she had done nothing wrong. Then the judge asked my parents a simple question. Did you leave your 17-year-old daughter behind and move to another state? Asterisk, asterisk, my dad froze. He started talking about difficult teenagers, financial struggles, and making hard decisions. The judge interrupted him. Answer the question. Asterisk, asterisk, after a long pause, my dad looked down and quietly admitted they had left because of financial hardship. The judge's expression immediately changed. After hearing both sides, she ruled in our favor. We were all granted 3-year restraining orders. My parents were forbidden from contacting us, coming near our homes or workplaces, or using anyone else to contact us. Any violation would lead to immediate arrest. They looked completely stunned, as if they'd never imagined they would actually face consequences for what they'd done. As we left the courtroom, my mom softly called my name. I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. With every step, I felt a little lighter. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But it finally felt like the healing had begun. For the first time, there was a boundary they couldn't cross without consequences. Outside the courthouse, Marcus shook each of our hands. He said we'd handled everything well, that the restraining orders were solid, and reminded us to contact him immediately if my parents violated them. That we had each other now. That together, we could build something better than what we'd been given. As we walked toward our cars, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a photo of Lily playing in her friend's backyard, completely unaware that someone had been watching her. Under the picture were only 4 words. This isn't over yet. Asterisk, asterisk, I showed Michael immediately. The color drained from his face. He called Jenny, who was already on her way to pick up Lily, while I told them both to meet me at my apartment. Then I called Marcus. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. He told me to forward him the message and drive straight home. He said he'd contact the police, meet us there, and that this was a clear violation of the restraining order. He also reminded me to stay calm, but stay alert. The drive home felt endless. I kept checking my mirrors, convinced my parents might be following me. When I finally reached my building, I sat in the parking garage for a moment, taking deep breaths and trying to pull myself together. Michael and Jenny needed me to stay strong. When I got upstairs, they were already there. Jenny was holding Lily so tightly it looked like she was afraid someone would take her away. The little girl looked confused and frightened. Michael paced across the room, running his hands through his hair over and over. I showed them the threatening text. Jenny burst into tears. They were watching my baby, she cried. I'll never forgive myself if anything happens to her. Michael wrapped his arms around both of them. I'd never seen him look so determined. About 20 minutes later, Marcus arrived with 2 police officers. They took our statements, examined the text, made several calls, and said they would send a patrol car to Lily's friend's house. They also promised to trace the phone number and increase patrols around my apartment building. They said all the right things, but I could tell they still didn't fully understand how dangerous my parents had become. They didn't understand how desperate or unpredictable they really were. After the officers left, we sat together in my living room trying to figure out what to do next. Jenny suggested checking into a hotel under fake names. Michael wanted to drive to his cousin's house several states away. As they talked, I felt myself getting angrier and angrier. This was ridiculous. We had done everything the right way. We followed the law. We went through the courts. We got restraining orders. And somehow they were still controlling our lives through fear. I finally stood up. "I'm done running," I said. "I'm done hiding. And I'm done letting them control how I live my life. Asterisk, asterisk, they already stole my childhood," I said. "I'm not going to let them steal my adulthood too." Michael stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "What are you planning to do?" Asterisk, asterisk, the truth was, I didn't know yet. I just knew we couldn't keep living like this. That night, we took turns staying awake while the others slept. I took the first shift, sitting by my living room window with the lights off, watching the street below. Around 2 in the morning, I spotted a car I recognized immediately. My dad's old Buick. It circled the block 3 times before parking across the street. I quietly took several photos with my phone, then woke Michael. Together, we watched our dad sit in the driver's seat, staring up at my apartment building. He never got out of the car. He never technically violated the restraining order. He just wanted us to know he was there, watching, waiting. The next morning, I sent the photos to Marcus. He agreed it was disturbing, but legally there wasn't much that could be done since my dad had stayed inside his vehicle and hadn't approached the building. He told me to keep documenting everything and said he'd already spoken with the detective again. When we hung up, I felt frustrated. The legal system had limits. Restraining orders were only pieces of paper. They couldn't stop someone who was determined to terrorize you. Michael and Jenny decided to take Lily to a secure hotel for a few days. I helped them pack, hugged them goodbye, and promised to check in every few hours. Once they left, my apartment felt strangely quiet. Instead of feeling lonely, I felt calm. It was as though I'd finally reached a decision. I couldn't keep living in fear. I called Melissa and told her everything. Then I asked her what she thought I should do. She was silent for a moment before asking a question that completely changed my perspective. "What do you actually want from your parents?" Asterisk, asterisk, not what I feared. Not what I wanted to avoid. What I truly want. After we ended the call, I sat down and wrote a list. I wanted to live without fear. I wanted a relationship with Michael, Jenny, and Lily. I wanted to stop feeling responsible for my parents' choices. And most of all, I wanted to be free of the past. One thing was missing from that list. I never wrote that I wanted reconciliation. I never wrote forgiveness. I never even wrote that I wanted answers. I simply wanted my parents out of my life. That afternoon, I did something none of my friends, my therapist, or my lawyer would have expected. I emailed my parents. It was only a few lines. "I know you're watching my building. I know you're not going to stop. So let's talk one last time. Tomorrow at noon. The coffee shop on 8th Street. Just me. No lawyers. No police. After that, you leave all of us alone forever." Asterisk, asterisk, before I could change my mind, I hit send. I didn't tell Michael. I didn't tell Jenny. I didn't tell Marcus or Melissa. This wasn't about changing my parents. It was about giving myself the ending I needed. I knew they weren't suddenly going to become reasonable people, but I needed to face them one final time. On my terms. I needed to say everything I'd carried for 12 years and finally close this chapter. My dad replied only minutes later. "We'll be there. No srets. No guilt." Just those 3 words. I spent the rest of the day preparing, not physically, but emotionally. I thought about everything I wanted to say, everything they needed to hear, every boundary I was finally ready to enforce. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Making a decision had lifted a weight off my shoulders. The next morning, I dressed carefully, not to impress them, to remind myself that I was strong. I took an Uber to the coffee shop and arrived 15 minutes early. I picked a table in the back where I could see the entrance but couldn't easily be seen from outside. I ordered a coffee I had no intention of drinking and quietly waited. Right at noon, They walked in. They looked older than they had in court. More tired. More worn down. My mom noticed me first and quietly nudged my dad. They slowly walked over and sat across from me without saying a word. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. These strangers, who also happened to be my parents. Finally, I broke the silence. I didn't ask you here to reconcile. I didn't come to give you money. And I definitely didn't come to hear more excuses. Asterisk, asterisk, I looked each of them in the eye. I asked you here because I need you to understand one thing. Asterisk, asterisk, it's over. Asterisk, asterisk, you've already lost. Asterisk, asterisk, not just the court case. Asterisk, asterisk, you've lost me. Asterisk, asterisk, you've lost Michael. Asterisk, asterisk, you've lost your grandchildren. Asterisk, asterisk, and you've lost every chance you'll ever have to be part of our lives. Asterisk, asterisk, my dad tried to interrupt. I raised my hand. I'm not finished. Asterisk, asterisk, then I took out my phone. I showed them screenshots of every threatening text, every email, and the photo someone had taken of Lily. Then I said quietly, I've already sent copies of all of this to everyone in your lives. Your relatives, your church, your neighbors, your employers, everyone. Asterisk, asterisk, I haven't done it yet, I told them. But I will if you ever contact any of us again. If you come near our homes, or if you so much as mention our names to people we know. My mom immediately burst into tears. We just want our family back, she cried. We made mistakes, but we deserve another chance. We're getting older, and we don't want to die alone. I looked at her for a long moment. You should have thought about that before you abandoned your 17-year-old daughter. Before you lied to everyone about what you did. Before you broke into Michael's house. Before you threatened your own granddaughter. That was when my dad lost his temper. You're ungrateful, he snapped. You've always been difficult. You've turned your brother against us. You owe us for raising you. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Actually laughed right in his face. Do you really think I owe you gratitude for doing the bare minimum as parents for 17 years before abandoning me? Do you honestly believe your parenting was so incredible that I should be thanking you for it? He had no answer. He just sat there, red-faced and silent. My mom kept crying, but I felt nothing. No guilt, no sympathy, just the clear realization that these people were never going to change. They were never going to take responsibility, and they were never going to become the parents I had always needed. I stood up. This is your final warning. The next time you violate the restraining order, I won't just call the police. I'll make sure everyone in your life knows exactly who you are. I have the resources to make your lives very difficult if you force me to. I don't want to do that, but I will if it's what it takes to protect my family. I paused before adding, my real family. Michael, Jenny, Lily, the people I chose. As I turned to leave, my mom called after me. Do you really hate us that much? I stopped and looked back one last time. I don't hate you. I don't feel anything for you anymore. You're strangers to me now, and that's your loss, not mine. Then I walked away. As I stepped out of the coffee shop, I felt lighter than I had in years. I called Michael from the sidewalk and told him everything. At first, he was upset that I'd met our parents alone. Then he worried they might retaliate. But more than anything, he sounded relieved. He said he wished he'd had the courage to stand up to them years ago. I packed a bag and decided to stay with Michael, Jenny, and Lily at their hotel for a few days, just to be safe. The moment I walked through the door, Lily ran straight into my arms. "Annie Emma," she shouted. It was the first time she'd ever called me that. I nearly cried. Jenny hugged me too and told me she was proud of me. She said she hoped I could finally find some peace. Michael didn't say much. He just squeezed my shoulder. He didn't need words. For the next few days, we lived in an uneasy silence, waiting for my parents to make another move. We constantly checked our phones. Every unexpected sound made us tense. But nothing happened. No phone calls. No texts. No emails. No sign of their car. Just silence. After a week, Michael and Jenny returned home. They changed every lock again, installed security cameras, put their house on the market, and started looking for a new place closer to my city. I went back to my apartment, back to work, back to something that finally resembled a normal life. 2 weeks passed, then a month. Still nothing. Marcus checked in regularly. He told us the detective had confirmed my parents had returned to their home state. The restraining orders were still active. He reminded us to stay alert, but also to start living our lives again. Slowly we did. Michael found a new job in my city. Jenny enrolled Lily in preschool. They bought a house just 20 minutes from my apartment. Sunday dinners became our tradition. Week by week, we built new memories and created a different kind of family, one built on love and choice instead of obligation. I kept expecting to feel something about my parents. Grief, anger, guilt. But what I mostly felt was relief. It was like I'd finally put down a weight I'd been carrying ever since I was 17. For the first time in years, I could focus on the future instead of being trapped in the past. 6 months after that meeting at the coffee shop, Marcus forwarded me a letter from my mom, so my address would remain private. I almost threw it away without opening it. But in the end, curiosity won. The letter was short. For the first time, there were no excuses. No demands. No attempts to make me feel guilty. My mom simply admitted that they had hurt me deeply, failed me as parents, and understood why I wanted nothing to do with them. She said they had started counseling, would respect the restraining orders, and hoped that one day I might be willing to hear a real apology, but that she understood if that day never came. I showed the letter to Michael. He had received one too. That night, we talked about it over dinner. We wondered if they truly meant it, whether they had finally changed, whether we could ever trust them again. We didn't find any clear answers. Instead, we agreed to take things one day at a time, focus on healing, and protect the family we were building together. I still keep that letter in my desk drawer, not because I'm ready to forgive them, not because I want reconciliation, but because it represents something I never thought I'd see. For the first time, my parents acknowledged my right to set boundaries, my right to decide who belongs in my life, and my right to define family on my own terms. Last week, Lily turned 4. Michael and Jenny asked me to help plan her birthday party, so we held it at my apartment. There were balloons everywhere, a beautiful cake from a local bakery, presents stacked across the coffee table, and Lily running around in a princess dress, laughing nonstop. Jenny spent the afternoon taking pictures. Michael grilled on my balcony. Friends stopped by throughout the day. The apartment was filled with laughter, conversations, and happiness. At one point, I stepped into the kitchen for a quiet moment. From the doorway, I watched Michael spinning Lily around until they were both laughing, while Jenny smiled at something one of our friends had said. My apartment, which had once been so silent and empty, was now overflowing with life. And in that moment, I thought about the note my parents had left on the kitchen counter 12 years earlier. You'll figure it out. Asterisk, asterisk, they were right. Just not in the way they expected. I figured out what a real family looks like. I figured out what love is supposed to feel like. And I finally realized what I had deserved all along. Life still isn't perfect. I still struggle with trust. I still go to therapy every week. Some nights, I still wake up from nightmares about being abandoned. I still tense up whenever someone unexpectedly rings my doorbell. But I'm healing. All of us are. Together, we've built something new from the broken pieces of our past. Something stronger. Something chosen. Something real. People still ask me if I'll ever reconcile with my parents. If I'll ever let them meet Lily. If I'll ever truly forgive them. I honestly don't know. Maybe someday. Maybe never. But I do know one thing. I'm no longer defined by what my parents did to me. I'm defined by everything I built afterward. By the person I chose to become. And by the family I chose to create.